OK, so today I want to talk to you about some tools that we've been working on at Yahoo to help you organize and develop web applications so that they're ready for users that speak different languages. And I realize that this might not be a problem that you have. You may be working on something like a local newspaper that only publishes news for Buenos Aires, so you may not need to translate Clarin.com. But if you're Yahoo and you have 800 million users spread out throughout the globe, then this is definitely a necessity. And this is a really old problem by now, and for which there are a lot of really good solutions in the server side for languages such as Java or PHP. But we found that in JavaScript there are some features that we're lacking, and that's why we started working on this. And so to put things in context, what we're trying to work on is internationalized web applications, but in the context of a modern web application. That it's a single-page application that uses JavaScript to render in the browser, so that you don't have to do a lot of reloads and make the sprint faster. But an issue that we have with this approach at Yahoo is that we have a lot of content, such as news, or weather information, or photos on Flickr, that's relatively static content that we don't want to wait 1 or 2 seconds to load JavaScript in order to show that content. So to us, server-side render is crucial. We want to show the content as fast as possible. And the current infrastructure that we have for Intl, that is, for instance, we have some supporting YUI, and there's some really good projects like jQuery's globalization, is that we couldn't get this to work on the server side. So let me give you an example, a bit more concrete example. So this is a screenshot of the Flickr photo page. The photo would be actually above the screen. And as you can see, I've marked with some arrows some key parts of it. This is mostly the metadata around the image, like the description of which camera it was taken with. And the parts that I highlighted are actual dynamic data that you normally store in a database, like how many views the photo had, how many favorites or likes, when was this photo taken. And this is data that you actually normally store in a database as raw data, such as an integer or a data object. So this is data that you actually have to format somehow to display to the user, because you're not going to say, this photo was taken 2 million seconds after 1970. So let's start from the beginning with the simplest example that we can think of. So this number that you see on the screen for 95% of you in the audience will be the number 1002. But for most of the figures today who are from the USA, this is actually number 1 with 2 thousands. We all know this is because in Spanish we use a dot as a delimiter for the thousands, but in English you use a comma as a thousand delimiter. But did you know that in French they actually use spaces? I just learned about it because my boss is French. And don't get me started about dates. I've been working as a remote employee for over 2 years, and the number of times that I've mixed up the day and the month, I just lost count. To me, this is totally ambiguous. Is this the 11th of December, or is this November 12th? I don't know. So it turns out that we actually can gather all these little differences in the way we show and display numbers and dates in different languages, and we can put them in a big table, and that thing actually exists. And it's called the CLDR, the Unicode Common Local Data Repository. It's maintained by the same group that actually defines the standard for the UTF-8 encoding. And what the things allow you to do is say, OK, how do I show a number or a date in Arabic or Chinese? And again, it turns out that a certain group inside TC39, which is the committee that defines the JavaScript language, realized this and worked on a standard called ECMA 402, which is the standard, the internationalization API for JavaScript. And it actually recommends that the implementations use the CLDR data. So how does this API look like? We have a Intl global object with 3 properties. Number format and data format kind of describe themselves. And Intl.collator is actually an utility for comparing strings. So you can, for instance, sort the file names in Chinese because it understands how all the UTF encoding works and how you sort things in Chinese. But we're actually not using it at the moment because an implementation in pure JavaScript would be too big. The algorithm is really large and it requires a lot of data. So we realized we can't just use it in the browser. So for now, I'm not going to talk about it. So how do you actually use this? Well, it's really simple. You create an instance of Intl number format. This instance has a format method which takes a number and gives you a string with the number formatted correctly. If you don't specify anything, it'll use the locale that the user chose for the system or the browser. But you can even specify it if you want. So for instance, if your application has an option to change the language of the application. Same goes for datetime formatting. You create an instance of Intl datetime format. It also has a format method which takes the date instance and it gives you back a string with the month and the day in the right order. So again, you can specify more options if you want, and it'll give you the date formatted in a way that's more readable by a human. You can even include the day of the week or a long version of the month. So now that we have this Intl API that we know will probably work in both server and browser, we started asking ourselves, OK, so in the context of single-page application, where do we use it? How do we use it? And so given a standard MVC architecture, we started asking ourselves, should we use this API in the module? Well, if we do it in the module, then we are kind of mixing up this logic between localization with the code that actually does network fetching or database access or input validation. So it kind of didn't quite fit there. So what about the controller? Well, the controller actually has your business logic, the stuff that actually makes your application what it is. So why would you put translation code there? And we ended up realizing that there's a parallel to CSS here on HTML in that we have raw data that we're trying to present somehow in a specific way to the user. The same way that you use media queries to show different styles according to the size of the device. And with that in mind, with this idea of doing things in the view and having servers at random, we started this project we're calling FormatJS. It's basically a set of integrations with high-level view libraries. And you can go to formatjs.io, and there's a lot of documentation and information there about both the project and the Intl API. And so, as I said, we have basically integrations with popular view engines, such as template engines like Handlebars and Dust, or React, as Sebastian was mentioning a few moments ago. So I want to show you some examples of how this works and how you can use it. And I'm going to get them in Handlebars, because I think it's probably going to be more familiar to all of you here. So in Handlebars, we have this format number helper, which takes a number and an optional second argument that allows you to say, oh, this number is actually a percentage or a specific currency. And again, same goes for date formatting. We have a format date helper, which takes a date and a couple of options to specify how you're going to show this date. And so far, if you spend a little time and think about it, you can realize, OK, we're actually formatting this data in a way that's useful for the user, but it doesn't really have to do with specific different languages. You can use it just for displaying these numbers and dates in a way that's readable, even if your website is just in one language. So now that we have this, we started asking, OK, so what's next? What more can we work on to extend this API? And as I said at the beginning of the talk, this is a problem space that has been explored a lot in server-side languages. And one very successful project was started by IBM quite a few years ago, and it's the ICU library, International Components for Unicode. And this library has been available for C++ and Java for a long time, and it's pretty much an industry standard right now. And it's, in fact, the same library that some browsers used to implement the Intl API. And the thing that we liked about the ICU library is that it has this feature called message formatting. And message formatting allows you to write these sort of complex sentences that depend on your dynamic data. And this is the kind of things that are actually kind of hard to do without some help from software. You have to start concatenating strings and doing awkward things with your code that mixes up your actual translations with your data. So, for example, in this case, we have a portion of the sentence that depends on the value of a certain value, such as num_likes in this case. And the rest is just syntax for special tokens that refer to values in your code. Again, messages already know about numbers and dates, so you also have small helpers as tokens that help you with numbers and dates. And finally, we have, so this is an example of how it looks in Handlebars. Again, we have format message, really simple helper that takes what's there is a reference to the actual message in your context, in your Handlebar context. And the rest is just a mapping between the values for the tokens and the values in your Handlebar context. And finally, we had this feature request for a long time to work something called relative time formatting that is a utility for giving a date in the past, calculate the difference between that date in the past and now, and give you that difference in a way that's human readable. So if you had a late 24 hours ago, and you specify just use format relative, it'll try to give you the best fit possible and then say yesterday, which makes sense. Or if you can actually force it to use numeric hours, but it won't just give you, just the number 24. It'll just give you, part of a sentence that says hace 24 horas, or 24 hours ago. So to wrap this up, I kind of want to take a little step back and try and answer a question that has been asked to me a lot lately. Because around a couple of months ago, we announced that we were not working on YUI anymore. And so one of the reasons that we're not working on it is because of how the JavaScript ecosystem looks like nowadays. We've seen in the last couple of years recently an explosion of JS frameworks and libraries that is really hard to keep up with. And some of them are really good, and we wanted to use them. And so I think that the reason why we see this many libraries and frameworks come up so often, even when there are really popular ones such as YUI, jQuery UI, or Backbone, we still see new MVC frameworks every day. I think we can use a metaphor here, and I think the same applies for programming languages. So recently, I was listening to this lecture by Alex Aiken, a professor at Stanford, who specializes in compilers. And he was explaining why he thinks that even though we have really popular languages such as Java or C++ or JavaScript, we still see new languages coming up every day. In JavaScript, we see lots and lots of languages that actually compile to JavaScript. And the reason he says is that because it's easier to, not that it's easier, it's less costly to write a new language than go and modify one and fix one. And that's because, to come up with a new language, you just need 2, 3 smart people, you put them in a room and you get a new language. Or you give Brendan Ike 10 days and you get a new language. And that's Brendan over there. But if we need to actually change the language, you have to give, we have around 10 million JavaScript developers. So if you have to change the language and change all the applications that those 10 million developers wrote, that's a lot of cost in human hours. And I think the same thing applies to frameworks. You have a standard base, but eventually people decide to break and write a new one instead of changing all the code that we already have. So in order to, again, in YUI we had this base layer that dealt with the DOM and give some cohesion to the library. It eventually, it eventually worked as a wall that separated us between YUI and the rest of the JavaScript ecosystem. And so each time that we wanted to use, I don't know, something like Moment.js or a new library that we liked, we had to kind of adapt it to the YUI way. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that this will keep happening. We will keep seeing new languages. We will keep seeing new frameworks come up every day. And so the way we build our tools and we build our libraries has to keep that in mind. We need to keep in mind that the ecosystem will keep evolving. And so FormatJS was one way we tried to avoid this issue. And the way we did it is by doing something that Sebastian talked a lot about today. And we're building on top of Polyfields. We're building on top of JavaScript implementations of existing APIs. In the case of FormatJS, we're using Intl, which is rather stable, but we may look into others. And on top of it, we just use this really small abstraction layer that we try and do the effort to keep as small as possible. And then we just add whatever we think is missing. The way we add those things that aren't there in the web platform yet, it kind of tries to address the issues that Sebastian came up with. So for instance, instead of going and modifying the Intl global object to add our own stuff, we keep our own globals, such as instead of Intl.relativeTime, which could be standardized someday, we're just doing Intl relative time as a one variable. And on top of that, we add, we come up with a simple way to integrate with our frameworks, so that what we do can adapt easily to any new framework that comes up. But actually, honestly, our final goal is to come up with, let's see if I can trigger this. Sorry. So the goal is to come up with something that looks like this. We want to take these new ideas that we have, such as message formatting, which is actually already a proposal for the standardization, and relative time, which isn't already there, and we wanted to contribute back to the web standards. We want to work with TC39 and the other standards committees to bring these ideas back into the language so they last longer and everyone can use it, not just ours. So that's it. Thank you. If you're interested in FormatJS, go to formatjs.io. And I hope that at least even if you're not using these tools, you take some time before you start working on your application or writing a new framework or library to think about how it integrates with the web platform and what's already in the platform that you can use. Thank you.